When we think about magic mushrooms, we usually think about them in a human context. But these fungi have been making these incredibly powerful chemicals for millions and millions of years. So that leaves us with a huge mystery. Why? What's the evolutionary point of a mushroom making a psychedelic compound? Well, the leading theory, the one scientists have been kicking around for a long time, is that it's all about defense. Could it be that the very thing that sends humans on a psychedelic journey is actually a highly sophisticated chemical bioweapon, one that's designed for a much, much smaller target: insects? So, the chemical at the heart of this whole thing is psilocybin. It's the key ingredient in hundreds of species of mushrooms, and you can find them almost everywhere on Earth. Now, in us, it works by latching onto our serotonin receptors, which, totally alters our perception of reality. But here's the crazy part. Insects and tons of other animals have those exact same receptors. So for a fungus to evolve a chemical that messes with the animal nervous system, that's a very strange, very specific trick to have up your sleeve. And look, humans have been involved with these things for thousands of years, from ancient spiritual rituals all the way to modern medicine today. But that whole long history just makes the central puzzle for biologists even deeper. Why would a fungus go to all the trouble of evolving a chemical that so perfectly copies a neurotransmitter from the animal kingdom? It's a huge energy investment for the mushrooms, so there has to be a really, really good reason for it. And that, right there, brings us to the prime suspect: insects. The theory goes that psilocybin is a major weapon in this ancient evolutionary arms race, one that's been raging for ages, long before any human ever stumbled upon these fungi. Let's just break this down. When you get right down to it, the conflict is incredibly simple. The mushroom, it just wants to survive long enough to release its spores and make more mushrooms. The insect, on the other hand, sees that mushroom as a delicious, nutritious meal. It is a fundamental battle for survival. But here's what's really interesting. For the longest time, this whole idea was just that, a really great idea. I mean, it made a ton of sense, but believe it or not, no one had ever actually tested it. It was this perfect scientific hypothesis just sitting there, waiting for its moment. And that's exactly what a team of researchers decided to do. They came up with this really clever experiment to finally figure out if psilocybin actually works as a weapon against insects. And to do that, they used one of the most common lab animals in the entire world, the humble fruit fly. So their setup was pretty straightforward. First, as you see here, they took dried powdered magic mushrooms and mixed them right into the food for the fruit fly larvae. Then it was all about watching. They tracked these little guys as they grew up, and finally, they measured everything. I mean everything. How many survived to become adults, how fast they grew, and how big the adult flies ended up being. They also ran a second test to see the more immediate, short-term effects. And as one of the researchers put it so perfectly, they gave the larvae something a bit like a bath in a sweet magic mushroom soup. Basically, they just exposed them to a liquid mushroom extract for 1 hour. After that little soup bath, they filmed the larvae to see what that quick exposure did to their nervous system. They measured really specific things: how fast they could move, how far they traveled, and, this is the big one, how coordinated they were. Were they stumbling around? Were they confused? These were the clues they were looking for. Okay, so after all that setup, what did they find? Well, let's just say the evidence against psilocybin being insect-friendly was pretty damning. And this chart right here, this is the headline. The first bar shows the flies with a normal diet. High survival rate, no surprise. But look what happens when you add just a low dose of magic mushrooms. The survival rate gets cut by more than half. And with a high dose, it's even worse. Only about a quarter of them even make it to adulthood. That is a massive, catastrophic drop. But the story doesn't even end there. The few that actually managed to survive, they weren't doing so great. They grew up to be smaller adults, and a lot of them had asymmetrical wings, which is a classic sign of developmental stress in an insect. Behaviorally, they were a mess. They moved less, they didn't travel as far, and their movements were all erratic and uncoordinated. So, and this is a really crucial point, the insects aren't off having some kind of mind-bending trip. That's not what's happening. For them, the psilocybin is just fundamentally messing with their basic biology and behavior. It's making them slower, weaker, and way, way less likely to survive. So, case closed, right? Psilocybin is an insecticide. Well, not so fast. Like all really good science, the results revealed a little twist. The story turned out to be a bit more complicated than it seemed. Okay, So here's the really weird part. The researchers also tested some fruit flies that were genetically modified to have fewer of those serotonin receptors that psilocybin targets. Now, you'd think they would be more resistant, right? Less for the chemical to grab onto. But the complete opposite happened. They suffered even worse effects. This tells us the mechanism isn't as simple as we thought. If it was just jamming a receptor, then fewer receptors should have meant less damage, not more. And it's not just in the lab. The team actually went out into the wild. They collected a bunch of different mushrooms and analyzed the insect DNA they found on them. And what they discovered was that the psilocybin-producing fungi had a totally different and distinct group of insects living on them compared to other mushrooms. This suggests the chemical is playing a real-world role in shaping the entire little ecosystem right there around the mushroom. So all of this just opens the door to other really fascinating ideas that still need to be tested. I mean, could psilocybin also be keeping bigger pests away, like slugs and snails? Or, and this would be wild, could it be manipulating certain insects into helping spread the mushroom spores? It's also possible that other chemicals in the mushroom are working together with the psilocybin to get the job done. The next, most obvious step for scientists is to do these kinds of experiments all over again, but this time using pure lab-grade psilocybin instead of the whole powdered mushroom. That's really the only way to prove for sure what this one specific compound is doing, and to finally pin down its exact job in the ecosystem. So where does that leave us? Well, with a much clearer picture for sure, but definitely not the final answer. The evidence that psilocybin is an insect bioweapon is really strong, but the story is full of these fascinating twists. The mushroom isn't talking, but science is definitely getting closer to figuring out its secrets. It's just a wild reminder that a compound that can open the human mind might actually be a deadly weapon for another species, all part of a silent war that's been going on for millions of years.